Are you able to see the screen? Screen is
Yes, sir.
visible? Okay.
Yes, visible.
My voice is audible, right? My voice is audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, audible.
Okay, okay, fine. Okay. In the last class, we stopped at ultrasonic sensors. We were discussing about various types of sensors, right? And we have discussed some of these sensors in the last class, such as inductive sensor, capacitive sensor, proximity sensors, right? Light sensor. Okay, those sensors we have discussed in the last class. Let us continue with the discussion on sensors. The next sensor that we are going to take up is ultrasonic sensors. This ultrasonic sensor, it sends the sound signal. I'll explain the operating mechanism by considering the diagram here. It sends the ultrasonic signal or the sound signal. The sound signal strikes the object, returns back. It returns back, and the returned sound signal is measured. Returned sound signal is measured. The parameters such as velocity of the received signal and the time taken to receive the signal back is measured. If the velocity of the received signal is same as that of the transmitted signal, that means there is no object present. If the time taken to transmit the signal, right, is same or it is very less as compared to when the object is present, right? Because when the object is present, it has to hit the object, it has to strike the object, there is some absorption of the ultrasonic energy, okay, and then it will return back to the transmitted transmitter. So it will take some time. This difference in time and this difference in velocity is used as the principle for measuring the presence or the absence of the object. An ultrasonic sensor operates by sending high frequency sound waves towards the target and measuring the time it takes for the pulses to bounce back. The time taken for this echo to return to the sensor is directly proportional to the distance or the height of the object. How much time the transmitted sound signal takes to receive back, it depends on the distance. It depends on the distance, and it also depends on the height of the object. More the distance, more the time taken to receive the signal, right? More the height, more the time taken to receive the signal back to the transmitter portion. Figure 1 illustrates a practical application in which the returning echo signal is converted to 4 to 20 milliampere signal. Returned signal is converted to 4 to 20 milliampere electrical signal. That means the sound energy is converted into electrical signal. And further, by converting the sound energy to electrical signal, this electrical signal can be used to monitor certain parameters. It can be used to control the devices. It is converted to 4 to 20 milliampere output, which supplies a monitored flow rate to external control devices. The operation of this ultrasonic sensing process is summarized as follows. Let us take a figure and explain. This is the figure which illustrates the working of ultrasonic sensors. Here there are various containers filled with some liquid. These containers are moving on a conveyor belt, and when the ultrasound signal is transmitted from the other end, okay, this is the receiving portion, if there is an object, then there is ultrasound signal passing through it, and it will be received at the receiving end. It will be received at the receiving end here. Yes, so when it is received at the receiving end, based on the presence of the object, the sound signal is converted into its equivalent electrical signal. What I mean here by saying equivalent signal is, suppose say the height of the object is 10 inches, then it may be converted to a signal which is of 10 milliampere. If the height of the object is say 7 inches, then it is converted into its equivalent 7 milliampere electrical signal. This is how the sound energy is converted into its equivalent electrical signal. Now, is it converted to any electrical signal? No. It is converted into a suitable range of electrical signal, which is in between 4 to 20 milliampere. This is the industrial standard that is used in industries. 4 to 20 milliampere electrical signal. It is the electrical signal range, the standard followed by the industries. Similarly, the pressure signal, the range of the pressure signal, the standard range of the pressure signal is 3 to 15 psi, pounds per square inch. Okay, that is the standard that is used in the industry for the pressure signal, right? Similarly, for the electrical, it is 4 to 20 milliampere. As we look into this figure, here it is an object which is filled with some liquid. It is sensed by the sensor, the level measuring sensor, and then based on the level sensed, it is converting it into electrical signal. This is the graph which shows the inches versus output. Output is in electrical. It is actually sound signal that is getting converted into electrical. Here the output is in between 4 to 20 milliampere, and the height that is mentioned here is from 5 to 30 inches. Suppose say if it is at 15 inch, then it is exactly in the middle portion of this graph. 15, because 5, 10, 15, approximately it is a 5 nearing to half distance. So it is nearing to the half portion on this linear graph. As the height increases, then the electrical output also increases. As the height decreases, the electrical output also decreases. This is the diagram which explains about the functioning of the ultrasonic sensors. This is the level detection, which detects the level and then converted into electrical signal. Okay. 4 to 20 milliampere represents the sensor's measurement span. It is a span of measurement followed by industries. 4 milliampere set point is typically placed near the bottom of the empty tank. The bottom of the empty tank or the bottom of the tank is considered as 4 milliampere, and the full tank is considered as 20 milliampere. Then in between, they are calibrated in between ranges. The greatest measurement distance from the sensor. 20 milliampere set point is typically placed near the top of the full tank or the shortest measurement distance from the sensor. 4 milliampere is for the bottom of the tank, and it is for the largest distance from the sensor. 20 milliampere set point is for the smallest distance from the sensor and the maximum height of the tank. The sensor will proportionately generate a 4 milliampere signal when the tank is empty and 20 milliampere signal when the tank is full. These ultrasonic sensors are able to detect solid objects, fluid objects, granular objects, and textile objects. Okay, textile is cloth and other materials. It is able to sense those objects also. In addition, they are able to detect different objects irrespective of their color. The ultrasonic sensors also detect the objects irrespective of their color. The color may be anything, but it is able to detect the type of the object. But one important point about ultrasonic sensors is that they are ideal for monitoring the transparent objects. That is, if the object is colored one, if the object is a colored object, right, then because of the color, it is absorbing certain energy. Because of the color, it is absorbing certain energy, because of which the energy of the received ultrasound signal will be less. And hence, we have to use these ultrasonic sensors ideally for transparent objects. Even though it works for colored objects also, but it is suited ideally for the measurement of the transparent objects, for sensing of the transparent objects. Okay. I hope ultrasonic sensor portion is clear here. Sensors. working on the ultrasonic principle. Is it clear here, students? Any doubts, any difficulty here?
No, sir. No.
Okay. Next, we will move on to one more sensor. It is called as strain gauge or weight type of sensors. As the name indicates, it is the sensor which is meant to measure the strain. Strain here means to measure the load or the weight. Okay, the object which is having certain weight or pressure, it is placed on this strain gauge sensor, and this strain gauge sensor undergoes certain stress or the strain. Either it compresses or expands. The strain gauge sensor either compresses or it expands. As it compresses or expands, what happens to the resistance? Is there any change in the resistance due to compression and expansion of the sensor? Yes, students. Whether there is any change in the resistance due to compression and expansion of the sensor or not?
Change, sir.
Yes, there is a change. Yes, because as the sensor compresses, that is converted into change in resistance, or that is producing certain resistance. When it elongates or expands, then there is certain resistance. It is a proportionate resistance. Okay, based on how much it is expanding and how much it is compressing, that is converted into its equivalent resistance. And this resistance is measured. There is a particular method for measuring this resistance. The method is by using a setup called as Wheatstone's bridge or some bridge arrangement. Bridge arrangement is nothing but it's an arrangement. Okay, it's an arrangement. It's an electrical circuit. It's an electrical circuit. Bridge doesn't mean here it's a bridge. That is our bridges. It is not a general meaning of a bridge. Here, bridge means it's an electrical circuit. It's an electrical circuit consisting of four resistors. Four resistors. Okay, they are arranged in the form of a diamond shape. Okay, just imagine they are arranged in the form of a sides of a diamond. Okay, you can just imagine the diamond how it is, and these resistors are placed along the sides of the diamond. Resistors, four resistors along, each one on one side of the diamond shape. It is just like that. And then when one of the resistance changes in one of the arms or on one of the sides of the diamond, here for example, okay, then what will happen? The output voltage changes because of change in the resistance of one of the resistances. Initially they are in such a way that the resistances are in such a way that output voltage is zero. Output voltage is zero. The values are such that in all the four arms of a diamond shaped procedure, diamond shaped setup, the resistance values are such that the output voltage is zero. It is null. It's called as balanced condition. Balanced condition, right? But when one of the resistance changes, the output voltage also changes accordingly, and hence this setup is used to measure the output voltage using certain voltmeter or any other meters, and then by measuring the voltage, it is indirectly calibrated to measure the resistance or to measure the strain or the weight of the object. Okay, this is how it is done in the industries. The voltage is measured using the Wheatstone setup or any bridge setup. Then by measuring the voltage, the resistance is measured. By measuring the resistance, the strain is measured or the weight is measured. All are calibrated. Calibration, I hope you will try to understand the meaning here. Calibration is just a previous example that I mentioned. 4 to 20 milliampere, the range for electrical signal, that was calibrated in the range of how much? 5 to 30 inches. That means 4 milliampere corresponds to 5 inches. 20 milliamp electrical signal corresponds to 30 inches. This is called as calibration. This is called as calibration. Whatever output we are measuring, that is calibrated in turn to measure the input, or it is calibrated to measure the signal that is required to be sensed. Right? A strain gauge converts a mechanical strain into electrical signal. It is the one which converts mechanical signal to electrical signal. Strain gauges are based on the principle that the resistance of a conductor varies with length and cross-sectional area. The resistance changes with the length and area of the conductor. That is, whenever there is a strain applied or weight applied, there is increase or decrease in the length of the conductor and change in the area of the conductor. When there is increase in the length or decrease in the length, when there is increase in the area or decrease in the area, that is going to change the resistance in turn, because this length and area are related to the resistance by the equation R is equal to rho into L by A. Resistance R is equal to rho into L divided by A, where R is the resistance, rho is called as specific resistivity of the material, that is a standard for that material which are using as a conductor. Okay, based on different materials, the rho value will be different. Okay, based on the material which is used for that conductor, the rho value will be differing, it will change. So rho value we have, then we have the length of the conductor L, then area of the conductor A. As the length increases, the resistance increases. Rho R is equal to rho into L by A. Okay, as the length increases, resistance increases. They are directly proportional to each other. What about the relation between resistance and area? It is inversely proportional. As the area increases, rho L by A, R is equal to resistance is equal to rho L by A. As area increases, resistance decreases. As area decreases, resistance increases. Right? So this is how there is variation in the resistance due to changes in the length and area of the conductor. The force applied to the gauge causes the gauge to bend. Whenever some force is applied, here the meaning of strain is applying of the force. When a force is applied, the gauge bends, that is, it expands or it compresses. The bending action distorts the physical size of the gauge, which in turn changes its resistance. Of course, due to bending action, there is distortion of the size of the gauge. The resistance change is fed to a bridge circuit that detects small changes in the gauge's resistance. The resistance changes fed to the bridge circuit, and the bridge circuit is used to measure the change in the gauge resistance. Then there are certain sensors called as load cells. Load cells, strain gauge load cells, which are made up of steel material and sensitive strain gauges. These are sensitive strain gauges. Now the example for these weight sensors are the or the load cells, like the weighing machines what you are seeing on the highways. If you have moved through the highways, you will be seeing there on the side weighing bridge, right? Okay, sometimes when you pass through the highways, okay, any national highways, then there will be written on the side there is some building, or there is some building which is written as weighing bridge, or these weighing bridges are meant to measure the weight or the load carried by the vehicles. For example, if you consider a truck, it carries certain load, right? How much is the load carried by the truck? That can be measured by the load cells. It's a heavy vehicle, and then that load can be, that much amount of load is able to be, we are able to measure even the largest weight of the load using these load cells. Strain gauge load cells are usually made with steel and sensitive strain gauges. As a load cell is loaded, the metal elongates or compresses slightly. When this load cell is loaded with certain weight, when the weight is applied on this load cell, the cell will or the metal will expand or it will compress. The strain gauge detects the movement and translate it to the voltage signal. The strain gauge will detect this motion or the movement of the metal, and this is converted into its voltage signal. This is how the load cell measures the weight. Here we have the hopper. Hopper is, have you seen hopper, students? Hopper. Any idea about hopper? Have you
No,
come
sir.
across? You have not come across. Okay. See, hoppers are the machines. For example, you might have seen concrete machines, concrete mixing machines. Concrete mixing machines, all of you have seen? Concrete
Yes, sir.
for house
Yes,
construction.
sir.
That is a hopper machine. It is called as a hopper machine. That is, any materials are fed into that, and whenever required, they are ejected out from the hopper machine. Okay, that is one example of the hopper machine. So here the materials are fed into this hopper, and we want to measure the weight of the material or the weight of the hopper here. Then these materials are ejected out of the hopper and they fall into the drum. They fall into the drum. We are supposed to measure the weight of the material which we have fed into the hopper. Then as they are ejected, they are falling into the drum. We have to measure the weight of this drum or the weight of the materials which are ejected into this drum. So this drum is placed onto the load cell. This drum is placed onto the load cell, and by the working principle of the load cell, that is, whenever there is any weight or whenever there is any strain, that is converted into its equivalent voltage or change in resistance. Right? That is how this load cell is able to measure the weights of certain materials. And there is output of the load cell which is applied to PLC. Programmable controller is nothing but the PLC. How much is the weight it is measuring? LBS means what? What is LBS? Yes. What is this unit LBS? Is it a unit of weight? Yes, please. Is it a unit of weight? Of course, it's a unit of weight. It's pounds. LB stands for pound. How many pound is equal to 1 kg? Any idea? How many pounds is equal to 1 kg? Yes, students. How many pounds make 1 kg? Students, are you here? Students?
Yes, sir. No idea, sir.
Okay. No idea? Okay. 2.2 pounds is equal to 1 kg. 2.2 pounds is equal to 1 kg. Okay. So 560 pounds. 2.2 pounds is 1 kg. So 560 pounds, you calculate how much it will be. Okay. This is a unit of weight. So this much is a weight that is measured by the load cell. It is applied to the PLC, and based on the weight that it is measuring, it is controlling the on and off of the hopper, because some controlling is needed, correct? And that controlling action is done by this programmable controller or the PLC. PLC controls the on and off of the hopper depending on how much load is required. Sometimes if you are putting load again and again, the hopper may become overloaded and it may not sustain that much weight, is it not? So the weight has to be within the limit, it has to be within the range. In order to look into that, the PLCs are used for on and off control of the hopper, right? Next one is temperature sensor, students. This temperature sensor we had come across when we were discussing in module 1, which was that sensor that we came across. Do you remember? Temperature sensor, which was a temperature sensor that we came across in module 1. Thermocouple. Yes, thermocouple, it is the most widely used temperature sensor. This thermocouple consists of two metals. Take two metallic wires, join them. Okay, join them. So this is one wire, this is another wire, one wire, another wire, join them at their ends. Okay, upper one wire, lower one wire, right? Then join them at their two ends. One end is called as hot junction, or it is measuring junction, and the other junction is called as the cold junction or the reference junction. Why one junction is called as hot junction? The reason is whatever temperature we are measuring, we are applying it to that junction. So that junction is called as the hot junction. And the other junction is a reference junction. The cold junction doesn't mean that it is not having any temperature, doesn't mean that it is maintained at certain reference temperature. That is the meaning of cold junction. Okay. Because of this temperature difference between the hot junction and the cold junction, or between the measuring junction and the reference junction, there is voltage produced in the circuit. In this circuit of two wires, two metallic elements or two metallic wires, voltage is produced, and this voltage makes the current to flow in the circuit. This current is measured when this current is measured. After this current is measured, the current measured is proportional to the temperature that is applied to the junction, or the temperature which is applied to the hot junction. More the temperature applied to the hot junction, more will be the current. Less the temperature applied, less will be the current signal output. Right? They are directly proportional to each other. And hence, by measuring the current or the voltage which is produced in the thermocouple, we are able to measure the temperature of the hot object. This is the application of the temperature sensors. Thermocouples operate on the principle that when two dissimilar metals are joined, a predictable DC voltage will be generated that relates to the difference in temperature between the hot junction and the cold junction. Difference in temperature between hot junction and cold junction produces the voltage, and this voltage results in the current. The hot junction or measuring junction is the joined end of a thermocouple that is exposed to the process where the temperature measurement is desired. It is a junction at which we are measuring certain temperature, or we are applying the heat energy. That junction is called as the hot junction. The cold junction or the reference junction is the end of a thermocouple that is kept at constant temperature. Cold junction is reference junction which is maintained at constant temperature, and it is called as a reference point or the reference junction. For example, a K-type thermocouple. There are various types of thermocouple, and one example for thermocouple is a K-type thermocouple. This thermocouple, when heated to a temperature of 300 degrees Celsius, that is, when an object of around 300 degrees Celsius is brought nearer to the hot junction, then at the cold junction it will produce a voltage of about 12.2 millivolts. At the cold junction it is producing the voltage of about 12.2 millivolts. If this temperature is more, say if it is 500 degrees Celsius, then the voltage at the cold junction will be still more. It may be say 20 millivolts or 25 millivolts. As the temperature increases, the output voltage at the cold junction will proportionately increase. Because of the strength of the temperature sensors and their wide temperature ranges, they are used in industry to monitor and control oven and furnace temperatures. Okay, so they are meant to control the oven and furnace temperatures in the industry because of their high strength. Ruggedness means the strength of the thermocouple, the load that it can withstand without breaking, that is called as ruggedness. And the temperature range it is providing, it is very wide. Because of these two properties, the thermocouples are used in industry to control and to measure or monitor the oven and furnace temperatures. This is the example that I mentioned here. This is our cold junction, reference junction. There are two metals, metal A and metal B. They are joined at the other end. This is called as hot junction. Here we are applying the heat energy. This heat energy makes the voltage to be produced in this circuit, and also the current flows. This current will cause, or it will be measured, and then indirectly we are measuring the how much amount of heat energy we have applied to this junction. This is one example of, or the figure which illustrates the functioning of the temperature sensors. Next is flow measurement. How do you define flow, or what is flow? Any idea what is flow? We say flow of liquid or flow of fluids. Is it not? What is a flow here? What is meant by flow? How do we measure flow?
kg per second.
Kg per second. Okay. Okay, you're right. Volume, that is volume flow rate.
So area into its velocity, sir.
Area into velocity. Okay, area into velocity. Okay, somewhat right. Okay. Then any other answer? Flow is the speed with which the liquid or the fluid is moving. Okay, liquid or the fluid is moving. It moves at certain speed. Is it not? That speed we are calling it as flow. And the speed with which it moves, it is called as the flow rate or the speed. Yes. Let us see how it is measured. There are many industrial processes which require accurate measurement of fluid flow. There are many of the such industrial processes requiring high accuracy of the flow rate. Although there are several ways to measure fluid flow, the principle of working of this flow measurement is that the kinetic energy is converted into electrical energy. The kinetic energy with which the fluid is flowing, that is converted into electrical energy. As you are aware, and you have studied in your PU level, there are two types of energies: potential energy and the kinetic energy. Potential energy is the energy possessed by any object due to its position. Due to its position, whatever energy is possessed by that object, it is called as the potential energy. And kinetic energy is the energy due to the movement of the object, due to its motion. Whatever energy is possessed by the object, that is called as the kinetic energy. Here, the kinetic energy is converted into some other form of electrical energy, because we are discussing about the flow. Flow is in motion, in movement. It is kinetic energy. Kinetic energy will be converted into some other type of energy. And for measurement of flow rate, we are using turbine type flow meters. Turbine type flow meters, which are very much popular for measuring and controlling of liquid products. For measuring and controlling of liquid products in industries such as chemical industry and in petroleum industries. These turbine type flow meters, they are very popular for measurement and control of the liquid flow rates, okay, in chemical industries and in petroleum industries. Turbine flow meters like windmills, they make use of the rotational speed or the angular velocity to indicate the flow velocity. So these turbines, they have the blade, they have the blades, right? Whenever the fluid strikes the turbine blades or the turbine, the blades will spin. The blades will spin, or they will rotate. They will rotate. Okay, that is kinetic energy is produced because of the kinetic energy of the fluid that is striking the blades and which is making the blades to spin, to rotate. Because of this, this is coupled to the generator or to the mechanism which is generating the voltage. And when this turbine is coupled, that means the shaft of the turbine is coupled to the generator. Okay, when the turbine is rotating, the shaft also rotates. When shaft rotates, there is voltage generated in the generator because of conversion of mechanical energy or kinetic energy into electrical energy, right? So there is a voltage generated in the generator, and by measuring this voltage, we are able to measure how much is the speed with which the fluid is flowing, or the flow rate of the fluid can be measured. This is how it is done in the turbine type of flow meters. And in windmills, right, you have seen windmills, the windmills which are installed on the hilly regions. Just if you move towards the other side, towards the Kolhapur road, right, towards the Kolhapur road, here from Belgaum, if you are moving, then on the hilly region, these windmills are installed, right? Windmills are installed. These windmills are converting the wind energy into electrical energy. They convert wind energy into electrical energy. Again, they consist of the blades. Okay, these blades, when they are struck with the air, when the air strikes these blades, they rotate, and the rotating motion or the kinetic energy of these blades is converted into electrical energy by some voltage generating devices, generating machines such as generators, right? So these convert the kinetic energy into, or the mechanical energy into, electrical energy. This is how it is done in the windmills also. Utilize their angular velocity or rotation speed to indicate the flow velocity. The operation of a turbine flow meter is shown in the next figure. Next figure, here you can see the turbine flow meter. There is a flow of the liquid. Okay, there is a flow of the liquid. This flow strikes the blade of the turbines. As it strikes the blades start to rotate. The blades will be rotating. Okay, and due to this rotation of the blades, this is sensed by the magnetic pickup. Magnetic pickup is just like a generator. It's just like a generator. It consists of a coil. So when these blades strike the coil, due to the magnetic action and cutting of these coils, what will happen? Voltage is generated, or electrical pulses are generated. We know that whenever there is flux linking with the conductor changes, an EMF is induced. This we have studied in our first year level. Is it not? In our first year level, we have come across in basic electrical, whenever the flux linking with the conductor changes, an EMF is induced. Is it not? And it is given by the formula E is equal to minus n into d phi by dt. Where d phi by dt is the rate of change of flux, right? And n is the number of turns of the coil, right? So d phi by dt is the rate of change of flux. As the flux linking with the coil changes, EMF is induced. This law is called as, what is the name of this law? Anybody remembers the name of the law? Yes, anybody remembers? Can you recollect here? What is the name of this law? Anybody? It is called as Faraday's laws of electromagnetic induction. Faraday's law of electromagnetic induction. Is it not? Based on this principle, the voltage is generated here and the pulses are generated. Okay, and these pulses are measured, the number of pulses, and the electronics or the display device measures the flow rate in terms of gallons per minute. Gallons per minute. Okay, it is gallons is actually the unit of the volume here, right? And here it is used for the speed measurement. Suppose, say, if there is a container and it takes 5 seconds to fill the container, then it is divided by 5. That is 60 seconds is divided by 5. So it is taken as 12 gallons per minute. 12 gallons per minute. This is how it is done in industries. Gallons per minute means a gallon is actually the unit of volume. Okay, but when we want to convert it into the flow rate, suppose the container volume takes 5 seconds to fill, then 60 is the standard that is used, that is divided by 5, then that will give us 12 gallons per minute. Okay, that is how we are able to measure the flow rate in gallons per minute. This is the what you are seeing is the part, the turbine flow meter. Okay, there is a flow here. There is a flow. This is the blade. This is the blade. What you are seeing, the red portion. This is a blade. It spins due to striking of this, converts it into electrical energy, and further it is coupled to some other load device. It may be coupled to some other load device for the further controlling of the field devices. Okay, this is how it is able to measure the speed with which the fluids are flowing. The basic construction for bladed turbine rotor, which is installed in flow tube, it rotates on its axis in proportion to the rate of the liquid flow through the tube. In proportion to the flow of the liquid, the rotor blade rotates, or the blade of the turbine rotates. A magnetic pickup sensor is positioned as close to the rotor as practical. This is the rotating portion. There are two parts, is it not, in generator? One is called as the stator part, another one is called as the rotor. Whenever a rotating magnetic field of the rotor in the generator, it links with the conductors or the coils of the stator, there is EMF generated according to Faraday's laws of electromagnetic induction. Right? Stator is the non-rotating part and rotor is the rotating portion. Whenever the rotor, which is consisting of the rotating magnetic field, strikes or links with the coil of the stators, or the links with the conductors of the stators, due to Faraday's laws of electromagnetic induction, that is, whenever the flux linking with the conductor changes, EMF is induced. This is how the EMF is generated in the generators. A magnetic pickup sensor is positioned as close to the rotor as practical. This is the pickup sensor which is placed nearer to the rotor or nearer to the rotating part. Fluid passing through the flow tube causes the rotor to rotate, which generates pulses in the pickup coil. Depending on how much is the frequency of the pulses, that decides the frequency of the pulses is transmitted to readout electronics and it is displayed as gallons per minute. More the frequency, higher will be the that is the frequency of the pulses decides, or it measures how much is the amount of flow rate or the speed of the flow rate, magnitude of the flow rate. More the frequency of the pulses, more will be the speed of the flow rate. Less the number of pulses, less will be the speed of the flow rate. Next is velocity and position sensors. Any doubts in the previous topic, students, in the temperature sensors and strain gauge or weight sensors? Right? Any doubts here? Any questions on strain gauge or weight sensors and on temperature sensors? Any questions here? Having any
No, sir.
questions, you can ask. Any doubts? Anything not understood?
No, sir.
Okay.
Sir, how many modules completed?
As of now, within 1 or 2 classes, another 1 or 2 classes I require. 1 class, I suppose, 1 or 2 classes to complete first half of second module. First half of second module. Then I will go to the timer part. There I may require another 3 classes, 3 or 4 classes. I will be completing the timer module. So another around 3 here and another 5 to 6 classes I will be completing this module. Okay, that second module will be completed. Right.
Sir, for examination purpose, is there any question bank of such where
Yes,
we can refer
definitely.
to
Definitely. Yes, definitely. I'll give the question bank.
for each module?
For we'll keep on second module, right? Second module we'll
Yes,
keep,
sir.
and whatever portion was remaining from the first module, that also we'll keep it. because the first module was a big module and we have kept some portion in the for the first test, and the remaining portion and the second module we'll keep it as for the second test.
Okay, sir.
Okay, right. Next, velocity and position sensors. Tachometer generators, they are one of the means of converting rotational speed or the kinetic energy into electrical voltage. These tachometer generators, they convert the electrical, that is the mechanical energy, into electrical energy. We know what is a generator, is it not? Generator is the one which converts mechanical energy into electrical energy. What about motors? Converts what to what? Converts electrical energy into mechanical energy. Motor converts electrical to mechanical energy, whereas the generator converts the mechanical energy into electrical energy. Tachometer generators, they are one of the means of converting the rotational speed into analog voltage signal, which can be used for motor speed indication and the control applications. The voltage signal that is generated, that measures the speed of the motor, and it is also used for control applications. We'll see that next figures, how it is used for the controlling applications. A tachometer generator is a small AC or DC generator. It may be an AC generator or a DC generator. Any idea, students, what is the difference between AC and DC generator? You have studied in your first year level. Difference between AC generator and DC generator. Try to recollect difference between AC generator and DC generator. Got it? What is meant by DC generator? Generator means it converts mechanical energy into electrical energy. Correct? DC generator means it converts mechanical energy into DC electrical energy. Output is DC, direct current. It is constant. Okay. In AC generator, the mechanical energy is converted into, of course, the electrical energy, but the electrical energy output is AC. It is alternating. The output electrical energy from the AC generator is alternating. It is AC signal. Okay. This is the difference between DC generator and the AC generator. So this tachometer generator can be used as an AC generator or DC generator, which develops an output voltage proportional to the rotating speed. It generates an output voltage, and the polarity of the output voltage depends on the direction of rotation of the rotor or the direction of rotation of the rotating object. Right? So depending on the direction of the rotation of the rotor, if it is rotating in clockwise direction, the polarity will be different, positive, negative. Okay. If it is rotating in the anti-clockwise direction, the polarity of the output voltage will be negative, positive. Like that. The polarity of the output voltage depends on the direction of rotation of the rotor. Next figure illustrates motor speed control application, in which a tachometer generator is used to provide feedback voltage. You can see in this figure. Okay, this is the load, students. This is the load. This is the motor. This is the tachometer. This is the tachometer. Okay. Now the motor is coupled to this generator. Motor is coupled to the tachometer generator. That means there is a connection between the motor and the generator through the shaft. Okay. And then there is a load connected to the motor. Suppose say the motor is here used for pumping the water. So the water is the load here. It is meant to pump the water. Okay. Then this motor, it is providing the mechanical energy. It is converting electrical energy into mechanical energy, and the shaft is rotating or the rotor is rotating. Okay. Then this is making the rotor of the tachometer generator to rotate, because both are coupled. They are connected to each other. and the mechanical energy or the kinetic energy or the rotating energy of the rotor is converted into electrical energy by the tachometer generator. Once it is converting, it will apply it to the PLC here. This is our programmable logic controller, which is measuring the speed in terms of RPM, say 1450 RPM. That is the speed of rotation that is measured by the PLC. Okay, that is the voltage that we are obtaining here, that in turn measure the speed of this motor. Say it is giving the speed of about 1450 RPM, revolutions per minute. Next, this PLC, what it will do is, suppose if it wants to control the motor, then it will apply some signal to this motor so that the motor speed is controlled. If it wants to increase the speed, it is applying certain signal to this motor, and it makes the motor to increase the speed. Speed of rotation of the motor is increased. And if it wants the motor to reduce the speed or to decrease the speed, then it is sending certain signal which makes the motor to decrease its speed. This is called as the feedback loop. Feedback, that means there is an output. The output is again fed to the PLC. It is providing certain signal and again applying it to the input of the motor. So from the output of the motor or from the output of the tachometer generator is applied to the input of the PLC, then the output of the PLC is again applying certain signal to the input of the motor. So this complete system is called as the feedback system or the feedback loop, right? This is meant to control the speed of the motor. To control the speed of the motor, this is the setup that is being used. The next figure illustrates motor speed control application, in which a tachometer generator is used to provide a feedback voltage to the motor controller that is proportional to the motor speed. This is about the velocity sensor. It senses the velocity of the rotation of the motor, and by measuring the output voltage, we are able to measure the velocity of the motor. Okay, this is about the velocity sensor, tachometer generator. Next is optical encoder. Possible questions that may be asked on these sensors is, explain the various sensors employed in PLCs. That may be a general question, or if they want to ask on any particular sensor, then they may ask particularly a question related to that sensor. For example, explain the ultrasonic sensors used in PLCs, or explain the temperature sensors used in PLCs, right? A specific question may be asked. If they want to ask for lesser marks, they want to ask for more marks, then they will generalize the question, and they will ask such that explain the various sensors used in PLCs. Definitely it comes for about 10 marks or 12 marks question. It's a 10 marks question because it's a lengthy description. You all have to cover all the sensors. All the sensors should be covered with necessary figures. You need not draw all the figures. And only one sensor don't explain in detail. That will not fetch you all marks. Okay. You all have to explain all the sensors with some points for each, important points for each, salient points for each, along with necessary figures. Figures are must. Don't skip the figures, because the figures are one which are explanatory. The figures explain the working of that particular sensor or of that particular concept. That is clearly explained by the figures, right? So you all have to see that the figures along with the salient points or important points are covered in your answers. The next topic that we are going to study is on optical encoder. This also I told in explaining one of the portion in module 1. Optical encoder, it is using the light energy. Optical means light energy. It uses the light energy to measure the speed or to sense the presence of the object. Suppose say there is an object, okay, right? This object, the light energy is made to fall on a disk. There is a disk, rotating disk. Okay, and the rotating disk is connected with the object that is rotating. The rotating disk is connected with the object that is rotating. When the object rotates, the optical disk or the disk, the circular disk, circular portion, it also rotates. This disk consists of number of slots or holes on its periphery. On the periphery of the disk, it consists of number of holes or slots. The light is made to pass from the other end. There is an optical disk here. The light is made to pass. This is rotating. This is rotating. Okay. The light is made to fall on this disk. Right. And then if it passes through the slots, then it is received at the other end. If it is falling on the opaque portion, then it will not be received at the other end. It is falling on the opaque portion. Correct. This is how, by measuring the light intensity that is received at the other end, or by converting that light energy into electrical energy, we are able to sense whatever is the speed of the rotating object, or whether there is object present or not. Okay, this is how it is done in the case of optical encoders. An encoder is used to convert linear or rotary motion into binary digital signal based on the light energy that is passing through the slots of the disk. It is received at the other end, and the light energy is converted into electrical pulses or the binary signal, zeros and ones. Encoders are used in applications where positions have to be determined precisely. For precise determination of the positions, these encoders are used. Okay, wherever you want to determine the position should be accurately determined. There should not be any error in detecting the position. In such applications, the optical encoders are employed. This uses light source and it falls on the optical disc with lines or slots which interrupt the beam of light to an optical sensor. There is the light source on one end. In between there is a disc. In between there is a disc which consists of number of slots on its periphery or number of holes on its periphery. This passes through the light passes through the disc wherever there are slots, and it is received at the other end where it falls on the sensor, and this sensor converts, or it is converting the light energy into electrical pulses, which is in the form of binary zeros and ones. An electronic circuit counts these interruptions of the beam and generates encoders digital output pulses. Next, we will move on to one more topic called as output control devices. Output control devices. There are a number of devices controlled at the output by the PLCs. PLCs control various devices at the output. These devices are, say, pilot lights, or it may be control relay, or it may be a starter, motor starter, alarms, heaters, solenoids, solenoid valves, right? Motors, horns. These are the various output devices which are meant to indicate the status of the output, and further it is used to control the field devices. Similar electrical symbols are used to represent these devices both on relay schematics and PLC output connection diagrams. The symbols that are used for these various output devices, okay, are same as for the relay logic and for the PLC ladder rung diagram also. The next figure we are going to see the various electrical symbols used for the output devices. Which is the symbol? This is for the taillight light. It's just like an LED indicator, on and off. The next symbol is for the relay, okay, control relay or the relay coil. Okay, this is normally open, normally closed. This is a symbol for the relay. Then the motor starter coil. Motor starter coil. So motor starter coil is used to control the power for starting on and off of the motor. The motor starter coil, it is meant to control the power for the starting on and off of the motor. That is called as the motor starter or the motor starter coil, right? Then we have motor overload relay current, motor overload relay contact, motor overload relay contact. Suppose if there is overloading on the motor, okay, then that is overcome by making use of a motor overload relay contact, that is indicated here by this symbol. There is any overloading on the motor, so the relay contact is used, which is used to indicate the motor in overloaded condition. Motor is in overloaded condition. Motor overload relay contact. Then the alarm. This is a symbol for the alarm. If there is any annoying condition in the industry, that means if there is any hazardous condition, if there is any changes in the setup, then that is indicated by an alarm. If there is any fault in any of the equipments, okay, it is indicated by an alarm. And once the personnel or the person who is the supervisor of that plant, or one is looking after that plant, he will sense this alarm and thereby he tries to rectify the fault. Once the fault is rectified, again the setup is brought back to its normal state. Then the heater, HTR stands for the heater, okay, the heater or the warmer that is used, right? Solenoid, this is the symbol for the solenoid. We'll see this next, the solenoid and the solenoid valve. Then this is the symbol of the solenoid valve. Solenoid valve, there is slight difference between solenoid and solenoid valve. We'll be taking up next, solenoid and solenoid valve. Then this is motor. This is the motor, and the next one is the horn. Okay, this is the motor starter and this is the motor. Motor starter is meant to control the power to turn on and off of the motor, but this is the symbol of the actual motor. Actual motor is MTR. If it is a motor coil, then it is indicated just by capital M. Then the horn, it's very clear, the symbol of the horn. Okay, so these are the various symbols, electrical symbols used for the output devices. I hope you all are following here, students. Yes? Any difficulty up till here? Any doubts? Any difficulty up till here? Yes, please.
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
Right. Fine.
So symbols will be used in further,
Symbols will be?
used in any diagrams.
Yes, of course. Of course, we are using these symbols in the ladder rung diagrams. That's why they have to be remembered, so that whenever we are coming across any ladder rung diagram in the explanation part, or we need to draw the ladder rung diagram from the description, that is the next part that I'll be taking up at the end of this first half of the second module. That is drawing the ladder rung diagram from the description, where you are supposed to draw the ladder diagram given the description. A statement will be given, a problem statement, and you are supposed to draw the ladder rung diagram. Okay, of course you will have to remember these symbols, they are necessary. Okay, actuator, all of you have heard of actuator. Actuator, what does it do? Meaning of actuator, what is the function of an actuator? Anything on this actuator, do you all remember? Have you come across actuators anywhere in your course of study? You have not come across?
Hydraulic actuator, pneumatic actuator, sir.
Yes, 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 they are the same thing. Correct, yes. So these actuators, they are meant to sense the electrical signal and convert it into mechanical output. Okay, they sense the signal, electrical signal, and they convert it into mechanical output. Here in terms of electrical, they are converting the electrical signal into mechanical signal. Okay, now these are nothing but electromechanical sensors, or they are electromagnetic in nature. Okay, that is, they are converting the electrical signal into mechanical signal. We'll see that later, how they are electromagnetic in nature. An electromechanical solenoid is an actuator that uses electrical energy to magnetically cause mechanical control action. That is, when you pass the electrical energy, when you energize with an electrical signal, then through the coil it is getting magnetized. We call this concept as electromagnetism. That is, whenever a current is passed through the coil, there is certain magnetic field which is surrounding the coil. This is called as electromagnet. Correct? So this electromechanical solenoid or the electromagnetic solenoid, it works on the principle that it is converting the electrical energy to mechanical energy or the electrical energy to magnetic energy. The solenoid consists of a coil, frame and the plunger. We can see in the next figure here. This is the construction of the solenoid. It consists of the frame. This is the frame, the outer structure, and this is the coil. Okay. This is the plunger. Okay, the plunger. Then the coil, through the coil there is a plunger which is to be moved in and out of the coil. This plunger is to be moved in and out of the coil in the presence of the air medium. The presence of the air medium, the plunger is to be moved inside the coil or it has to be moved outside the coil, in and out motion of the plunger. Okay, so this coil is energized by the AC signal. This coil is energized by the AC signal. This is the symbol for the AC signal. Okay, AC voltage is applied to this coil. When it is energized and the current flows through the coil, there is a magnetic field surrounding this coil. Because of this magnetism, what will happen? And the spring action of the plunger will move inside. Okay, plunger will move inside. And suppose if this coil is de-energized, that is, we turn off the supply or we decrease the AC signal, then what will happen? Due to de-energizing, the magnetism will decrease or it will be off and the plunger will return back to its normal state. It will go back to its normal state. Right? This is how the solenoid works, to convert the electrical energy into mechanical motion or converting from electrical energy to magnetic energy. Yes, and this is the symbol of the solenoid. The next figure shows the basic construction and operation of the solenoid. The operation of the solenoid can be summarized as follows. Let us see into the working of the solenoid. The coil and frame form the fixed part. This coil and frame are the fixed portion. They are not movable. When the coil is energized, it produces a magnetic field that attracts the plunger. When the coil is energized, there is a magnetic field produced surrounding the coil which attracts the plunger, pulling it into the frame. So it pulls it into the frame. Here, plunger is put into the coil, inside the coil or into the frame, and thus creating mechanical motion. When the coil is de-energized, the plunger returns to its normal position with the assistance of the springs. The frame and plunger of an AC operated solenoid are constructed with laminated pieces instead of a solid piece of iron. This is an important point. What it indicates here, the frame and the plunger, they are made up of laminations, just like the laminations of a transformer. Right? If you have seen small transformers, right, then they are laminated. Their core is laminated. You have studied this in your first year level again. Okay, the core of the transformer is laminated. There are laminations, right? Then what are meant by laminations? There are sheets. They are laminated sheets. Instead of a single structure, they are used in the form of a sheets, and these sheets are glued together. These sheets are glued. They are attached. Sheets are attached. Various laminated sheets. Okay. The reason for using these laminated sheets is that to reduce the eddy currents. Just like how the transformer is laminated to reduce the eddy current. Similarly, here to reduce the eddy current, the frame and the plunger, they are made up of laminations. Okay. This eddy current is the current which is induced, which is in the form of circular loops. And the disadvantage of this eddy current is that it produces heat energy. Lot of heat energy is produced by the eddy currents. And because of this, there is a power dissipation and there is less efficient working of the solenoid. In order to avoid this, in order to avoid the eddy current which is produced if a single structure is used. Instead of that, they go for laminated sheets which are glued together, laminated sheets which are placed one above the other, okay, one on another. That is called as the laminated sheets. If there is a single structure, there is eddy currents produced, loops of the eddy currents are produced which are producing high heat energy, which is a loss. The solenoid works inefficiently. In order to avoid this, they are making use of the laminated sheets. Okay. The frame and plunger of an AC operated solenoid are constructed with laminated pieces instead of a solid piece of iron to limit eddy currents induced by the magnetic field. So these solenoid valves are electromechanical devices that work by passing of electrical current through the solenoid, thereby changing the state of the valve. Now, till now what we have studied is just the construction and operation of the solenoid. We have not yet taken up solenoid valve. Next, what we are going to study is the valve portion, that is the solenoid valve. We'll see what is the difference between solenoid and solenoid valve. These solenoid valves are nothing but they make use of the solenoid along with the valve. It is called as solenoid valve. Solenoid converts electrical energy into mechanical energy, and this mechanical energy links with the valve opening and closing. And hence the combination of the solenoid along with the valve makes up what is called as the solenoid valve. Okay. Normally, there is a mechanical element which is often a spring that holds the valve in its default position. There is a spring action because of which the valve is in normal position. The valve is in normal position. Once there is the mechanical movement caused by the solenoid, that is conversion of electrical energy into mechanical energy, there is a movement of the or mechanical movement of the plunger that will cause the opening and closing of the valve. Okay, let us see the next.
Sir, it has same function as that of contact relay, no, sir?
Same function as that of the contactor. Okay.
Contact relay.
Contact relay. Yes, yes, of course. There also it is converting electrical to mechanical. Correct. Yes. Relay, again, it is nothing but the conversion of electrical energy to mechanical energy there. So there also it is converting the same thing. Here also it converts the same. It is electrical to mechanical energy. Correct, you are right. Yes, you are right. You are talking about contactors, is it not?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Correct. Contactors also are the ones. Contactors, they are nothing but the modified form of the relays. Right? Relays are able to handle smaller currents, whereas contactors they handle larger currents. Contactors are nothing but the relays itself. Relays are meant to handle small current values. Contactors handle larger currents. So in contactors also what happens, or in relays what is happening, the electrical energy is getting converted into mechanical energy there also, and thereby there is a tripping action. Okay, there's a tripping action. The contactor is either getting closed or open in the relays also. It is as good as the same concept. Okay, it's as good as the same concept, that is converting from electrical energy to mechanical energy in relays also, and in the solenoid also. It is an electromagnetic action or the electromechanical action which is taking place. There is a conversion of electrical energy into mechanical energy. Got the point here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. There is a mechanical element which is holding. There is spring holds the valve in its normal position. A solenoid valve is a combination of a solenoid coil and the valve. That is what I told. A solenoid valve is a combination of the solenoid and the valve which controls the flow of liquids. Solenoid valve is used to control the flow of liquids, gases, okay, steam and other media. That is, when it is electrically energized, the valve will either open or closed, or it will allow the medium to flow. It will allow the either the solids either the liquids or the gases or the steam media to flow. The next figure illustrates the construction and principle of operation of the solenoid valve. This is the figure which indicates the construction and the operation of the solenoid valve. As you can see in this figure, here we are applying with the electrical signal on either end, which magnetizes the coil, and this moves the plunger towards the orifice. This is the orifice in a small portion. It will be more clear if I show the next figure first. Yes. So this is the coil. We are energizing this coil. It will get magnetized. It is getting magnetized, and then because of this, it will move the plunger towards the orifice. This is the orifice, right? This small opening is called as the orifice. It will move towards the orifice, and this opening will get closed. The opening which is wider, it will get closed. Once the opening closes, there is no movement of the fluid from one end to another end. This is the inlet. So once this closes, there is no movement of the fluid from the inlet towards the outlet. So this is during the de-energized position, when coil is de-energized. Okay, that is when there is no electrical energy applied. It is in normal position. One minute. Okay, right. So when it is energized here, it will move the contacts to it will move the plunger towards, right? The orifice gets closed, and there is no movement from the inlet to the outlet. This is when the coil is energized. Okay, then when the coil is de-energized, then it is the reverse process that is taking place. When we decrease the supply to the coil, then what will happen? The plunger will move back, and then there is a movement of the fluid from inlet towards the outlet. Okay, so this is how the solenoid valve works. So this is how the solenoid valve works. When the coil is energized, here, what is happening? The plunger moves towards the orifice. There is closing of this orifice, and there is no movement from inlet to the outlet. When the coil is de-energized, there is opening of this plunger, and there is movement of the fluid flow from inlet towards the outlet. Right? It is just a working principle as to when it is energized what will happen, and when it is de-energized what will happen. Next, we are going to study what are called as stepper motors. Okay, so these stepper motors, they are nothing but the motors itself. We know what is a motor, right? The motor converts electrical energy into mechanical energy. That is, when we apply the electrical energy to the coil, that interacts with the magnetic field. Okay, the coil, when we apply the electrical signal to the coil, that magnetic field of the coil will interact with the magnetic field of the poles. Okay, and then because of this, what is happening? There is rotation of the rotor. The rotor will rotate due to the interaction of the magnetic field. There is a movement of the rotor of the motor, and the motor will start to rotate, or the rotor will start to rotate because of the interaction of the magnetic fields. Okay, so this is how the motor is, normal motor. Now when the motor is rotating, it is continuously rotating. There is no steps as such. But when we consider the stepper motors, when we apply the pulses, when the signal input is applied in the form of electrical pulses, right? When an electrical pulse is applied, the pulse in the form of high current and the low current, high current, low current, okay, that electrical pulse is going to rotate the rotor through steps. That is, say when you are applying first pulse, it rotates by 60 degrees. The rotor rotates by 60 degrees and aligns with the magnetic field accordingly. Whatever is the magnetic field, it aligns accordingly and it rotates by 60 degrees. Right? This is for the first step. Then for the second step, it rotates by another 60 degrees. Third pulse, another 60 degrees. So like this 60 degrees, how many rotations it will make, or how many steps it will make for one revolution? it is making a rotation of 60 degree for every one electrical pulse applied to the stepper motor. Okay, now if it wants to rotate with 360 degrees, for 360 degrees, how many rotations it will make, or how many steps it will make?
6 rotation.
6 exactly. Very good. Because one step 60 degrees, so 360 divided by 60, it is 6. Right? It makes 6 steps. Fine. Which rotates continuously. So stepper motors are different from the standard types or normal types. The normal types rotate continuously, whereas the stepper motors rotate in steps. The shaft of the stepper motor rotates in discrete increments. That is, the rotor or the shaft of the rotor rotates in increments, 60 degree or say 30 degrees. Okay, like that. They rotate in increments. When electrical command pulses are applied to it in the proper sequence. Every revolution is divided into number of steps. That's what I told. For every revolution, there is a particular number of steps. If you take 60 degree angle, 6 steps. Okay, if you decrease the angle, say 30 degree, then the number of steps will increase, 12 steps, like that. And the motor must be sent a voltage pulse for each step. It depends on what type of steps you require for a particular application. It depends on the application. Right? Depends on the application how many steps you require for one revolution. The amount of rotation is directly proportional to the number of pulses. How much it rotates? Okay, the amount of rotation, it depends on the number of pulses. More the number of input pulses, the more it rotates. And the more the frequency of the input pulses, more will be the speed of rotation of the stepper motor. 1 degree per motor will require how many pulses? If it is 1 degree step, how many steps it will require? 360 degrees or 360 pulses. One pulse is making the rotor to rotate by 1 step. 360 pulses, 360 degrees or 360 steps. This degrees per step rotation is called as resolution. There is a particular word terminology for the amount of degree rotated per step. Now for 60 degree, if it rotates per step, that is resolution, we call it as 60 degrees, like that. So the amount of degree per step is known as the resolution. Next is open and closed loop motor control system. We already covered in the previous discussion the feedback. It is almost the same here. Now the normal motors, they are open looped systems. The meaning of open loop is, as you all can see in this figure, this is the motor. This is the motor here. This is the motor. This is the PLC. Okay, it is controlling the working of the motor, and the output of the motor is connected to the load. It is driving the load. It is operating the load. Okay, then this is called as open loop control system. That means there is no output from the load back to the PLC. There is no output going from the load back to the PLC, back to the controller. This is called as open loop system or the open loop control. The next one is the closed loop system or the closed loop control. Here what will happen? The output from the load, it is measured by the tachometer. That is tachometer. All of you have come across tachometer. What is the function of the tachometer? Tachometer instrument. Speed for measurement of speed. Very good.
Speed.
Yes. So tachometer is used for measurement of the speed. Yes. So once it measures the speed here, it feeds back that speed signal to the PLC, and this PLC will compare the feedback signal. This feedback signal, whatever is coming from the tachometer, it will compare with the set point value. It has a particular set point value that it wants the motor to operate at this much speed. It has a certain fixed value, reference value. It compares with that reference value, the feedback signal value or the speed of the motor, and thereby it tries to reduce the error. That we'll see next. That is what is called as a servo motor. Okay. So this is one example that I am explaining here, called as the closed loop control system. Closed loop control system. It is also called as feedback loop or the closed loop control system. And the first one is the open loop control system. All servo motors in closed loop mode operate in closed loop mode, whereas stepper motors, they operate in open loop mode. Closed loop and open loop are shown in the figures here. Then open loop is the control without feedback. In the open loop, there is no feedback from output to input. Whereas in closed loop, there is a feedback from output back to the input. The controller tells the steps, how many steps to move and how fast to move, but does not verify where the motor is. In the open loop system, what is happening? The controller will tell the motor how many steps to move, right? But there is no way or no means of measuring the position of the motor or the speed of the motor. So this is done where in the closed loop system. We are able to measure the position or the speed of the rotation of the motor, and thereby we are able to also control the speed or position of the motor, rotation of the motor. Closed loop control compares speed or position feedback with the commanded speed or position and generates a modified command to make the error smaller. That's what I told students. It compares the feedback signal and the set point signal, which is already fed into the controller. So already in the controller here, PLC, it has a particular set point value. This feedback signal is compared with the set point signal. The difference between the two is tried to be minimized. To try to minimize the difference between two, that is the function of the controller in the servo motor. Next figure illustrates a closed loop servo motor system. Motor, we'll see that here first. This is the closed loop servo motor system. Servo motor system. The difference between motor and servo motor, try to understand here. In the motor, it is just the open loop system. You all cannot measure the position or the speed of the rotation of the motor. But in servo system, we will be able to measure the speed or the position of the motor, and we will be also able to control it. The speed of the rotation of the motor can also be controlled. Here there is a servo motor. It is connected to the load, and from the load, the speed of rotation of the servo motor is measured by this feedback device, and it is sending it to the controller. So the feedback device may be a tachometer to measure the speed, or it may be an encoder to measure the position. The position information is set to the controller, and the speed information is sent to the servo amplifier. Here the position signal, which is there in the controller, it compares the set point value with this feedback signal. The difference between the two will be minimized by this controller, and even whatever signal is, sorry, and this feedback signal, which is the that is speed information, it is fed to the servo amplifier. This is the amplifier which amplifies the information so that it is in the required form. Okay, if the magnitude is less of the signal here, to try to increase the magnitude of the signal here. This is an amplifier which increases the strength, or it increases the magnitude of the signal received. This is called as amplifier. So it does that, and it applies the signal from the controller to the servo motor. That is how much speed it wants to control, or how much is the position that it wants to control. That can be easily controlled by this feedback mechanism or the closed loop servo motor system. A feedback device such as an encoder for position and a tachometer for speed are either incorporated within the servo motor. These provide the servo motor's position and speed feedback information that the controller compares to its programmed motor profile and uses to alter its position or speed. Next is C-LIN circuits, and this we'll take up in the next class. Okay. So tomorrow we will have a class at 8:30. Is it okay? Tomorrow, 8:30.
Yes, sir.
8:30 to
Yes, okay.
Around what time your first class starts? 10 o'clock? 10:30.
Yes, sir.
10:30. 10:30 or 10?
Sir,
Your first
10:30, but
10:30, sir.
10:30. Okay. Then we'll take up from 8:30 to 10 tomorrow. Is it okay? 8:30 to 10.
sir, take 1 class.
1 hour. Okay.
It will be
Okay. Fine. I'll take from 8:30 to 9:30. That is okay? Or 9 to 10 you want?
8 to, sir, 8:30 to 9:30.
Okay, fine. Yes, we'll take. Then we'll see after that class when to take up next. Depending on the portion coverage, we'll look into that. Okay. Was it understood here? Whatever we discussed in today's discussion? Saval?
Yes, sir.
Clear with the concepts and the points that we discussed? Praveen?
Yes, sir.
Understood the working of various sensors? Praveen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sohel? Inoch?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Understood the working of the sensors?
Yes, sir.
No doubts
Yes, sir.
here in the working? Any difficulty, any problem in understanding? Anything not understood?
No, sir.
Okay. Malik Rain Sheikh?
Yes, sir.
Understood? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Raghavendra Deginal? Okay. Okay, students, then we'll continue in the next class tomorrow. We'll have a class from 8:30 to 9:30. Thank you.